Okay.
This is the
Everyone's
first
fine.
meeting of the year for the Hopkinton Budget Committee. It's the one I get to call to order. So I call this meeting to order on April 9th, 2025. The first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Nobody's on that.
And now the election of the chair. Is there, and under statute, it can only be one of the elected budget committee members. Is there a motion to elect someone chair? Steve.
I'm gonna say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'll nominate Krista for chair.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? It passes. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to serve again. I appreciate the support. Whoa, I came on in a hurry. Okay. Okay. And thank you, Neil. Especially for not forgetting the Pledge of Allegiance and feeling in order as I sometimes like.
It's actually on the.
Rush to do.
Yes.
Hey, Rich. All right, so the next order of business is to elect the vice chair. Do I have any nominations for vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Steve Reddy for vice chair.
Should we have a discussion? I will note that I support Steve being vice chair. I think Steve has a good tenor of service on the committee. He sat next to me last season and kept me in line when I went rogue. Would be honored to have him as a vice chair. Were you pointing at something, Lauren?
The screen's blinked out 3 times.
Oh, okay.
Heads up.
Does Steve accept the nomination before we vote? Okay.
Thank you.
I don't think anybody asked me for the record. Okay, then in that case, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Okay, the ayes have it. Congratulations, Mr. Reddy. The next order of business is to introduce our new members. Our new members this year are Bryce Petricelli. Did I get it right?
Good.
Okay, perfect. And Lauren Clement. Those are our 2 new at-large members. We also will have Thomas Lipoma serving as the Hopkinton Village Precinct rep, but he is not able to join us this evening. And everyone else is a returning face.
Has the precinct actually confirmed that? Can you speak to that?
We did, yeah. We had our annual meeting on March 27th and Thomas volunteered.
Another difference is that Vicky, while here last year in the context of the Hopkinton Village Precinct rep, is returning as a select board rep. So congratulations.
Thank you.
on that, Vicky.
Slightly
And-
bigger budget.
Yeah, haven't done the math.
Mr. Dano, you are rejoining us. We are very grateful to have you back another time. So I'm going to ask our new members to introduce themselves. So in alphabetical order, Bryce, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure.
And then Lauren?
I'm Bryce Petricelli. I've been in town since 2018. I'm a stay-at-home dad these days, but I have a background in the law. I was a lawyer and construction management and some hands-on experience there as well.
Welcome.
Lauren Clement. We bought our house in 08. It was a fixer up. Spent a couple of years fixing her up, and then I think moved in around 09. So we've been here years or so. Have 4 kids in the school district, have a wife that works at Harold Martin, and had a landscape business, and now I'm a property manager for a substantial insurance company in charge of a lot of Maintenance, that's what my wheelhouse is. I do property management, sign leases, have power of attorney over buildings. I live in facilities. That's really what I do. So,
Great. Welcome, Lauren.
thank you.
All right. So approval of public meeting minutes for February 12th. Generally, folks who were, since this is kind of weird because we have like a new committee set, I would ask the members who were not present for that committee to abstain from the vote. So the members who were present for that committee meeting, do we have any discussion on the public meeting minutes for February 12th?
My only discussion is to say thank you to whoever does the minutes. They did it. It's really, really well done. Concise, clear. So thank you very much.
Beverly, who is our executive assistant grant coordinator, does the minutes.
She does a really nice job. I agree.
She's very good at it.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. Okay.
Add our 2 abstains.
Oh, yes, all abstaining. Thanks, Lauren.
Aye.
Say abstain. I
Abstain.
guess. I don't know. Thank you. All right, so we have a general recap of school district and town annual meetings. Any thoughts to share?
I mean,
Ideas for the future?
I think from the school board's perspective, things went very well, obviously, in terms of the votes. But in terms of the presentation, we feel like we're getting closer and closer to having it dialed in and that people feel pretty informed both beforehand and between the handouts and what's on the slides. There aren't a lot of questions. So I think the last 2-3 years it's gotten better and we'll keep tweaking it.
I thought Don's handout was very well received.
I agree.
Got several
you, Don.
comments on that. So thank you for putting that together.
Yeah.
I don't think it does well on the screen, but as a handout, it's excellent.
Yes, numbers could be bigger. Is that
Yes.
okay?
Well, it might be too much for the screen.
Okay,
It's just better as a handout.
yeah.
I also thought you did a very nice job.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
and I also liked the handout at town meeting that it had the blurbs about all of the articles that, instead of just leafing through the big book, the sort of folded 11x17 piece was very useful. I saw everybody reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it saves paper. You don't have to do some interviews.
Do folks think that having the handout and the short presentation and voiceover from the budget committee is something we should aim to replicate for maybe with improvements, but mostly continue to do?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I agree. Anyone? Yeah, okay.
I would just note that at both of the annual meetings after the meetings, there was an awful lot of extra handouts, and I don't know how you adjust that. You don't want to not have enough, but there was extreme surplus at both of them.
That is true. Also, didn't they run out of books? Like at the school?
They
It's hard to
gave a
dial that
lot
stuff
more
in.
out at elections, which is why we went a little heavier on our handouts. And maybe the school did the same thing.
Yeah.
We did 500 and there were just over 500 people, but it's always that fear of people not being able to get one. So
Yeah. We did the same thing.
Understandable.
I got a lot of questions around on Don's sheet, and I think your explanation helped a little bit with this, but there's 2 columns that said recommended, and then now I'm
It
forgetting.
was
what's
proposed and recommended, I
and
think,
they're the
yeah,
same.
yeah,
And so, and then it says the budget committee passed,
Yeah.
all of these things 10 to nothing.
Mhm.
And so people were kind of like, well, wait, was this just what was originally proposed?
Mhm.
And it took some explanation of like, no, this has gone through several iterations and it started here, and people painstakingly, both
Yeah.
on the board and you made, Rob, and you made
Yeah.
efforts to explain how it got to where it did, but that wasn't really reflected on the paper we handed.
I
out.
think that, so we had talked about this, Don, and like in the past, I think that the budget committee, like, in the event that we would recommend a number that was not actually what the school board, like, because how we did it is they came to us and we were like, we're not comfortable, and they went back and they brought a new proposal, and so the proposal and the one that we put forth was the same.
Because
But
we didn't formally do that.
right, but like in the past, I believe the school board has formally proposed something and the budget committee said like, no, make it lower and put forth, right? And put forth like a
If
lower
there's a
number.
conflict going, when the final document is done.
Right,
If they're the same, we probably ought to scratch the one.
yeah,
That has nothing in it this time around. But when we do have a difference, i.e. the budget committee's in different number compared to the school or the town, then it would be appropriate to have that in
I
there.
agree. And like this year, I think it would have been simpler to have one
It would
column.
have been simpler.
Is that what you're suggesting also?
Yeah, or you could say the budget committee should have formally like voted on a number and sent that back, in which case you could have had two columns with different numbers, right?
But I think at the handout, we ought to have just the two numbers, what was proposed and what was recommended by the budget committee. Now, when they're the same, then you don't have to have the recommended one. That makes sense?
It does.
I think the situation where the school board would propose something officially, and then we officially vote it down and vote in a different number is kind of hopefully rare. So what I think would have worked based on what I'm hearing from you is we would have just had the one recommended number and maybe like a bullet at the top that says like the recommended number reflects
Yeah.
iterations with the school board or something like that. Does that make sense to you, Rob?
Yeah, I think that. I think the changes that came, I think there was a lot of work between Don and Laura that helped get to that final number, and then how we get the clarity on what evolved over the months. So.
The final document, I don't think wants to get into all the iterations of how we got to that final
Right.
number. We either agree or we don't agree.
Mhm.
And it's only been, 2 or 3 times that we didn't agree, and that was back a few years ago.
Yeah, I think it's okay to just have one column. And not that everyone wants to know how the sausage is made, but it does provide some assurances that some people have done some work and had some conversations, and in fact, numbers have been gone back and forth.
Yeah. So I mean, just for in the future, like maybe that's like a slide that says like this was the back and forth and the final recommended number, or it's like a bullet somewhere. I mean, we voiced it over this year to your point, but I could see how the two columns would be like maybe confusing. Okay. Any other thoughts? Great. Well, I'll turn it over to Vicky. Do you want to give our?
Sure. Do we not have the screen today?
I can turn it on. It's
I mean, it's okay. If you guys want to look at the revenue and expense summaries, they're in the drive. But I guess I'm just gonna start by saying I've had a really fun time being a select board member since March 20th. And I've got to experience some department tours, including the police department, the Department of Public Works, and the wastewater treatment plant. And with this captive audience and whomever watches this on YouTube someday, I would like to say to the folks who happen to be on the Kentucky sewer system, that we need to be more careful about putting foreign objects into the sewer system. I learned a great deal from David, our superintendent at the wastewater treatment plant. And the stuff he finds in the sewer was one of the most interesting parts of that. I mean, the engineering and all is interesting, but
Is there a lost and found?
and I'm gonna find a way to
be more vocal about this in everyday life. But the amount of plastic bottles and rags that somehow go down drains and toilets. I don't even really get the logistics of it, but it's fact. It's an everyday thing. So we need to just talk to our friends and neighbors about being more careful with our aging infrastructure, specifically what goes down the drain. We all know what's allowed down the drain, and it's three things. Two comes from us and one comes from the toilet paper roll, and that's it.
Come talk to little Georgie at our house.
Speech. So that was fascinating. I've been really enjoying this. So for the revenue and expense summaries,
Before you leave,
please go ahead.
did David show you the money that he has washed, that he's reclaimed? You might want. Yes.
He-
Dirty money.
It needs to be laundered.
That's right. Is that accounted for in our revenue?
He hasn't touched it yet.
He needs to go under a UV light or something. So I'll share more next time about what I learned. Okay, so on the revenue and expense summaries, it's for January and February. And a lot of what I've learned from Neil is that these reports sort of arbitrarily break up the year into 12 segments and assume an even number in each segment. But of course, many of these are timing related. So if it looks off in terms of, well, we should have 16.67% of every line item, and it's not, some of them, which I will highlight, are aberrations, but for the most part, it's a timing issue because things like rooms and meals tax won't come in until December. And there are other things like that as well. For example, we've already paid all the insurance for the whole year. So that looks out of whack if you're looking at the percent of the total being expended. But we won't have any more added to that. So it'll slowly meet as the year goes on. I'll start with expenses. One of the expenses which I would like to highlight, which was is larger and front loaded into the first part of the year, is the IT line item, which is the second line down, 4135. And that is generally upgrades to Windows machines because Microsoft is sort of forcing everyone to Windows 11. Oh, thanks, Neil. So you can see it's the second one from the top. 49% of the budget has been expended. And again, that's because we've been upgrading machines before we fall off a cliff with Windows. We've also, and I will welcome your questions, and I'm pleased to have Neil here. But another line, which is trending higher right now, is the 4445, which is welfare vendor payments. And that's because we are spending more on food for the food pantry at the moment, which may have something to do with the transition of the board of the food pantry, but at the moment that is trending higher than budgeted. And then if you go down to the bottom, you see our debt service numbers are, well above the 16% that this report expects. And that's, again, a timing issue. So does anyone have anything they want to ask about expenditures? And I know, like I said, happy to have Neil here, but also happy to take questions back to the board and return with answers for next time.
I just have a curiosity question on the expenditure sheet where under encumbered, nothing is encumbered. Is that just a difference in practice between a school and a town?
Yes, yeah, it doesn't show on this sheet. So you do have what's encumbered on the other sheet, which is the year end, and it shows everything that got encumbered.
And I should have probably said this before we even kicked off as part of my little intro here, but since we have some new members joining tonight, I will give a little spiel on sort of how this normally works. So typically like I mean, depending on whatever we're discussing, but typically there's like an update from the different governing bodies, or they're here presenting their budgets or whatever, but typically they're speaking to an update or the budget. And we will have discussion, questions or comments from the members of the committee. If there is a question or a follow-up needed, the respective representative from that board will take that back to the board. So whether the school board or the town or the precinct. And at least last year, those turnarounds have been very fast, like the next week. So I know like Rob and Ken last year and the precincts as well did a great job. And like if the board had follow-up items that the representatives couldn't answer, they would return the next week with sort of like a summary answer. And that's generally like the protocol that we try to follow in terms of requesting follow-ups or additional information on line items or why something is one way or the other, or the information that we're trying to gather. I think were you guys both at the town or school meeting where I had the slide on like the role of the budget committee? You were there, Lauren, I think saw. So I won't like go too much more into that, but in past years we did have like the municipality association present on kind of the role of the budget committee. They have materials available as well if either of you are interested in kind of like the role of the committee and why it exists. You can get it on their website, or I think we still have their contact information. We could probably get the presentation.
Presentation is on our website
Okay.
under the budget committee.
Perfect.
It's on our YouTube channel too.
Yeah, and so the short summary is we're responsible for approving the bottom line budgets, doing due diligence to understand the budgets, and not making or setting like policies or micromanaging the departments. That's kind of the TLDR version of it, but more information is available on the slide. Okay, sorry for interrupting. I should have.
No, I love it. Did a little
I
intro.
clarify the encumbrances.
Yeah.
The town is on a strictly cash basis on expenses, so the only encumbrances we have are what's encumbered from last year's budget. Unlike the school with the purchase orders, where everything gets encumbered. So this is what's actually been expended. So that is the difference.
Thank you.
Yes.
I had a question, actually Neil may know the answer, but Vicky, it was actually asked by a taxpayer after they had an interaction with one of our patrol officers. Do we purchase their sidearms or do they get an allowance for their sidearms?
I don't know.
We purchase, we own,
We purchase them. Okay,
and for liability reasons,
understood.
we have Glocks.
Glock with a telescopic sight, infrared sight, which seems in this taxpayer's opinion, a little bit excessive for a town like Hopkinton. Especially when there's two manufacturers that actually produce guns in the state of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Passing that along.
One of those manufacturers also has guns that are produced for law enforcement that have been civil suits.
Well understood.
Not to say that they don't have good weapons, but some of their weapons have issues apparently.
The transfer station appears to be having a good start to the year. Just ahead on revenue and behind on expenses. Is that just a timing thing or is there something else going on there?
I feel like we had a conversation about how some of these line items include personnel and that it might be a timing issue with just payroll and biweekly payrolls. Not necessarily falling evenly with the month ends. Does that sound right, Neil?
Yeah, are you referring to the revenue?
Both. They're ahead on the revenue and they're ahead in a good way on expenses.
Yeah, I think some of the revenue comes in the beginning, depending on how Webster pays, and so I don't think at this point it's necessarily a trend. It's more timing.
Got it.
I have a question about the Public Works Department.
Okay.
We had a pretty light winter, it appears, not a lot of snow plowing. Does that mean that we're gonna have a lot of carryover revenue on the Public Works Department and highways and streets?
You mean like savings on expenses?
Yeah, like we didn't use much salt, we didn't use much sand, not much overtime.
I would have to either defer to Neil or ask Dan. Because I'm not sure. I got to stand on like a 20-foot high pile of sand, which was pretty cool. But I'm not sure how it compares with other years.
I think you'll see actually like overtime is running low. It would not be unusual for us to be almost at 50% at this point because most of our overtime is related to plowing. So it appears to be running lower.
Thank you.
Let's not jinx it. I'm not out of April.
That's right. And I don't know if we use less salt necessarily. A lot of times it depends on the type of storm that comes more than the amount that comes. These ice storms are much more costly than a foot of snow.
So walking by the pile, we used, I think, more sand this year so far than last year. And consequently, you probably used more salt. We didn't have as much snow. We had those nasty little storms that just sort of went on for hours upon hours and not much there, but you still had to treat it. So again, I'm just throwing that out as an observation.
So Neil, should I go into my detail here to look at the OT line item?
Yes, you could see it in there.
Okay.
I think it's at 17% if I remember right,
Oh,
which is
so
pretty
that's-
low. See if my, okay.
Here we go. It is 17.6. Pretty good, Neil.
What are we gonna do without you?
We discussed this yesterday, which is the only reason I had any clue.
You remembered you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I asked him to print out the chart of accounts for me and it's 54 pages.
You've got plenty of free time.
Um. Who's next? Or should I go to revenue?
Neil, do you, or Vicky, I mean,
Mhm.
has the town hired a Neil replacement yet?
No, there's a
Okay.
committee.
Okay,
We have applicants. The committee is meeting and they will discuss, meeting tomorrow, and they will discuss whom they would like to interview.
okay,
And then the next select board meeting is a week from Monday,
Okay.
where they will present us with the finalists
okay.
that they have winnowed down.
Are we gonna have a gap? Isn't your last day like May 1st?
It's May 9th. There will be a gap. Probably best case scenario, somebody would be in place June 1st.
Okay.
Neil's working on making all kinds of manuals, lists, and I'm gonna ask for his cell phone number before he leaves.
I'm leaving my cell phone here.
Anyone else have any other questions on the town?
I'm gonna switch to revenue here.
Okay.
And I don't really have that much to say, except that, again, as I'm learning this, these are estimates, right? That need to be watched carefully over time. For example, in speaking with Neil, this is what I've learned, the motor vehicle permit fees. This is just based on historical data. But, you know, for example, if car buying takes a downturn, or if there's a supply chain issue or whatever, we might end up lower than expected revenue. Or, for example, other line items where we might be dependent on the state, for example, the rooms and meals tax. Again, that's based on historical data, but we just have to prepare ourselves that we might not have hit the nail on the head once, you know, we get further along in the year. I don't really have any in particular that I want to point out to you, but I'm happy to field discussion about any of these. And again, I'm still learning, but any question is helpful for me as well as the
When do we
wider,
get the room and meals tax distributions?
the last 2 weeks of December.
We will know when they finalize this year's budget, what that number is. Right now, following the formula, this is what it will be. But the legislature has talked about pulling some of that from municipalities.
Of course they have.
Of course.
Yeah, so I was reading an article today, and of course, they're moving their budgets forward now, but I was reading in the House budget that the rooms and meals tax is being level funded, which based on the original formula is actually a cut of $11 million, like sort of statewide. So again, we'll just prepare ourselves for adjusting things as we find out as we are able to predict better.
What's that as a percentage? 11 million.
So the total was 137 million last year. So whatever 11 divided by 137 is, I can't do it in the 9.
8%.
Perfect.
It's gonna say 7.5. I should. We touched on this when we were talking about the bond proposal, the concern about the money, and obviously the answer was that the money was basically in an account. And this will also, I guess, the same question for the school. So obviously there's a lot of things going on with the feds and a lot of things going on at the state level. Are there things that are, I know it's hard to say now, but I mean, is there monies that we rely on that is like being discussed, being taken off the table other than the usual downshifting?
I don't believe so. We get so little. The schools may be more affected than we are, but on the town side, it's room and meals. And nobody's talked about flood reimbursement. We had to fight for that. I guess about 10 years ago, they were trying to take that away, but that's still in the budget at this point. And those are really the only two things.
Okay.
And the bond funds are still there. Everything's, we feel very confident that we'll be getting what we were given.
Are we talking about the revolving fund? The water? I mean, excuse me, when you say is the money in the account, do you mean the 10%?
No, I was just saying when we were discussing a bond last year or early this year, one of the questions was, how certain was the money? And the answer was that basically it was in an account and ready to dole out to the towns that were tackling the problem. So,
yep.
That's what the reference was.
What's the average interest rate we're getting on the investments and or on just the general operating account?
That's around, it went up to 5. I don't know if it's dropped on that, but it's been pretty consistently at 5. Joel Moyer, our treasurer, and Kelly Henley, our finance director, have gone back and forth with banks and worked on that. Our operating account is with Merrimack County Savings, and they were relatively low, so they made some changes. And miraculously, Merrimack County rates went up for us on our funds there. So it's I think just under.
Still be 5.
I think it's just under 5 at the moment.
Is that what the 280 is? Did we budget against something in the high 4s?
The 280 on the, we came in a little above that last year. So this was below that. This used to be like $20,000. So.
Great.
It looks like it's doing fine so far. Right on.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, comments on the town? Hearing none, we'll move to the school update.
Sure.
Rob.
We had 3 different documents that are in the drive. Kind of touch on each briefly. So the MS-22 is essentially sent to the state 20 days after or within 20 days of school district meeting to say these are all the things that were appropriated. It's pretty straightforward in terms of what the numbers are. As I was reviewing it, the things that I had questions about were the fund transfer numbers and what they are and why they're there. So food service, $100,000 is the amount of money that the school schedules for the food service not being able to cover its own costs. The special revenue fund of $800,000, that's all of the federal money that we see coming our way through the IDA and the various title grants. The capital reserve is $10,000. That's a vehicle trust. Apparently it's a capital reserve and not a trust. And then the expendable trust, that 480 was what we voted on, the 350 for CIP, the 30 for tech, and the 100K for special education. I'm gonna stop saying that. And whether that money is raised via fund balance, as in the case of the tech trust, it doesn't matter. It still has to be in there as $30,000 because it still has to be appropriated, even though we're going to use some of our own revenue for that. So that goes into the state, and then there'll be another similar document in September that's going to do dial into the financial glossary. There's the MS-24, the 22, then the 27, and I'm sure there are other numbers, but it's a fun thing to read about. The February financial shows a little bit, as Michelle in her overview, Medicaid reimbursement is a little slower and lower than it's been. Not so much for any reason other than we have fewer identified children that qualify us for Medicaid reimbursement. So nothing that's going on at the federal government level in terms of a difference there. We did have some discussions about how Medicaid reimbursement is done at our finance committee a couple of weeks ago. So for kids that are on IEPs, we can get reimbursed for certain services that are provided. That's documented either by instructional assistants or by the nursing staff, and then goes to the special ed department at the SAU, and then it's outsourced to be billed. And there was a conversation about whether or not the outsourcing was something that maybe we could bring in-house. I think it might be a topic of discussion when our next superintendent comes on board, because we're sort of in a holding pattern on a lot of things right now as Ms. Doyle is in the wings. But the cost to outsource is 8% of what you receive, but it's a pretty tenuous process. So slipping up could cost you more than the outsourcing does. The other thing that's in the February financial is if you're wondering why the trust fund balances don't sync with what our actions are, they haven't necessarily been acted on. So for instance, the special ed trust still says 271,000, even though we've drawn that down quite significantly, that 240 came out. So that'll probably be in the March financial. Same for the building trust. We've taken some actions, but the money hasn't been drawn yet. The vehicle trust is, we drew the 27,000 for our new Dodge ProMaster, new used Dodge ProMaster. Tech trust, and then the benefits trust, ironically, has $603 in it. So it's, keeping with the New Hampshire area code. On the revenue side, on the plus side, tuition is up, both, between the combination of people that tuition in and the preschool numbers. And as we've discussed throughout the year, special education is still upside down about 600K in the financial lines, but we have not applied that 240 to that yet. So it will be less. And then there's the audit. And
before we get to that,
yeah.
Can I ask a
Yes.
interim question? Is special ed still sort of tracking? Like there haven't been any changes since we met last, like more students moving in, or like, because we have,
Right.
Sorry, I've had a long day. Historically, we've said if one student changes status or moves in, then it swings. And was the occurrence that caused some of the swings before. There haven't been any of those major changes since, it hasn't gotten worse in that regard.
It has not gotten worse.
Okay.
There has been some change, but it's still in flux. So
Okay.
we'll see how things sort out over the next month or two, but not to the detrimental side of things, perhaps to the financially anyway, perhaps put us in a little better situation.
Yeah. When I say worse, I mean financially, for
Yes.
not like
Yeah.
commentary on the student, obviously.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So that's good news. The audit, you're welcome. It's 58 pages. There's a lot of information in there. I think it's, it's sort of telling, on the revenue side, you see the two figures, depending upon which one you're looking at, 75% comes from the town or 79%, 18% from the state. One breaks it out, adequacy is 12% of our money, swept is another 6%. So you could add the 6 to the 79 and we're really paying 85. There was a question about the federal government, and I guess I was always, prior to being on the school board, thinking that we received a lot more money from the federal government than we do, and it's about $800,000, which doesn't keep me up at night. So depending upon how things go with the current administration and changes that might be happening, it certainly wouldn't be a good thing, but it also wouldn't be catastrophic, I guess, in my mind anyway. Tracking a little bit as to what's going on in Concord, there are two things that we're paying very close attention to and have done some advocacy on. So there's a House Bill 675, which is now embedded into the House's version of the budget. It would place a cap on school district spending to, I think their current version would be 5-year average of the CPI or some subset of the CPI, which goes back to our discussion and that was part of the letter that I sent to some of the representatives, that you have the wrong metric. So that is in place. It does, after the first 2 years, have a provision there that would allow school district meeting, the legislative body there, to override that cap with a 2/3 majority vote. Whether or not that survives in the Senate, I would say perhaps, hopefully, is doubtful. Some of the comments that the governor made today and Senate President is that they're going to be looking really closely at what the House has suggested, and some of the stuff may go by the wayside. The other one that might hurt us substantially, or not hurt, but change, is Senate Bill 297, which is a change in insurance regulation. So it would impact Health Trust substantially, where Health Trust has openly stated that if this comes to fruition, they may no longer exist as an entity, which means that we would have to go back and look at all of our contracts and renegotiate with another party, which, may be more difficult than we would like to imagine. But essentially what that's all about is the amount of reserves that is claimed to be carried by those bodies. That there was a point in time, according to the Secretary of State, where health trusts had fallen quite low in their cash reserves. And this regulation would put them in a position where they have to have at least 12% cash reserves at all times. And if it falls below that, then we all would get a bill to make up the difference. So we've asked as a board for somebody from Health Trust to come and talk to us from their side in terms of what it is, so that we have a sense as to how we position ourselves moving forward, because we'll know by the end of the summer whether or not it goes, at which point we'd have to take some action immediately.
Would the health trust situation affect the town also?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're in the same,
All the insurances. Yeah. That's kind of scary.
a lot of most municipalities, I would say, and school districts.
Wow.
School care and Primex, I believe, are in support of the legislation, while Health Trust is not. So, and I think, as I was reading through some of the documentation, and part of the reason we're asking for somebody to come in is this is kind of like a he said, she said thing. And, you read what the Secretary of State says and you say, well, that makes absolute sense. You would want to have those reserves. And then we have the discussion on the Health Trust side that those things didn't actually happen, or didn't happen in the way that Secretary Scanlon is talking about. So we need more information.
I just want to make sure I understand the prior one that you were speaking of, the cap. So this is for the entire budget. This is not like a per pupil
So it's designed to be that 5-year average. And when I went back and looked at the CPI numbers, and I couldn't get the subset that they were referring to because it was one of those odd categories. But generally speaking, it would have been about 4.6% in that 5-year span. So they would say to you, that's the most that your budget can rise in that coming year, dictated by that. And, you know, as we had that conversation, it's very much like saying to, you know, HR Clough, somebody who provides oil and propane, we're going to tell you how much you can charge more based on the cost of watermelons, not on the base of oil and propane. So we'll see what happens. And I think in the last round of both town and city, meetings, there was larger opposition to caps in general. So whether or not this is something that the Senate will move forward with, or excuse me, that the Senate will move forward with in their budget. You know, the intriguing thing is that this went from being a bill to being incorporated into the budget, which is the exact same way we ended up with education freedom accounts. It was a bill. They couldn't get the traction they needed for it, so they put it in the budget, and the governor said, I want to pass the budget and I don't want to fight over this one piece. So
Yes.
we'll find out a lot about where Governor Ayotte is. She was pretty vocal today. I'm not sure if it was specific to this or not, but.
Was there any consideration for the changes to special education costs in that?
No. So there were other things in HBC that had been stripped out. This is the only thing left standing.
On the special education question, I read in the newspaper that the Lakes region is considering what we had talked about, like a regional hub. Are we, I mean, I don't know if the Lakes region is like closer than, but it strikes me that there could be like a capital region.
So interesting you bring that up. So I read that article at 5:35 and I texted Mr. Flynn at 5:36 and said, isn't this our group? And he was like, that is our group. So we are actually a part of that discussion and we're named in that article. And so, yeah, this is sort of what.
I was paywalled, so I could only skim it.
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing is that superintendents after this last cycle are starting to get a little more serious about it. And that will definitely continue to be at the high level of discussion with Amy Doyle as she comes in, if something like that can happen in the capital region, but it would serve us well for sure. Yeah.
Locally, anything coming down the pike? We don't have contracts for another, 1 year?
We have a year off. Yeah, thankfully. I mean, unless we end up having to renegotiate on healthcare. As you're, perusing through any of that information and you have a question, just email me at the school district's email account. That'd be fine.
Any other questions, comments, follow-ups for Rob? All right. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Mr. Nato. I guess we will skip the Hopkinton Village Precinct update since Thomas is not here. Unless there's no one else who can speak to it, right?
I mean,
I'm gonna assume it's
nothing to report.
not much to report, yeah. But we'll get an update next time. All right, which brings us to the budget season schedule. So Neil kindly printed this out for us.
Oh, Don, did you do Don?
VP.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr.
I
Houston.
was gonna let you slide right on by. Thanks, sorry, Don. I didn't pay you enough, did I?
Yeah,
I don't have much to offer. The February report didn't show much. We have no revenue that's been brought in. We've been living off our cash. We're doing a lot of things. The annual meeting went well. Everything got passed. The bond item that we had for 1.7+ million for doing the potholes, for checking for the lead and copper, that got approved. We had a large turnout this time for our annual meeting. We had 5, 2 of the people are here, Norm and Lauren, that were there, but that's sort of good and bad. But everybody voted for it, so that was good. But that's all I have.
Is there any update on like the water treatment facilities stuff?
It's a thing in progress.
Okay.
It's gonna take at least a year, maybe a year and a half to get the things fixed that need to be fixed to get us up to speed and to get, so we can hopefully get through another 10 years with the existing plant before we have to redo the whole thing.
Were the water main breaks in Kentucky or Hopkinton?
They don't have that much water in Hopkinton. It was.
Yeah, it was like by Maple Street.
It was, the big one that we had was going into Amesbury Park.
Mhm.
And the water situation got pretty dire. We actually had to hire a person who serves all of the Northeast that can sort of come in and tell you where your leaks are.
Hmm.
And the way he does that is he has some kind of an instrument that he holds his ear to the fire hydrants. And he can literally tell by the sound of that water going by there that you have a leak beyond there. It's like dowsing rods almost.
Wow.
And he found the one up going into Amesbury Park was 100 gallons a minute leak with nothing on the surface, basically. And that got to the situation where now we keep in mind we have a 600,000 gallon tank on Boundtree
Mhm.
beyond where you live. And that was going down at a rate faster than the water coming into it was. So we had to expedite getting that leak fixed within a matter of a few hours, or we would have sort of run out of water. So that's how critical that one was. But leaks are very difficult to find when they don't appear on the surface.
Is that going to impact the budget?
Any major leak impacts the budget. There are somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000 every time we have to dig up the road. That one fortunately was off the road, so that was much less. The couple we've had on Maple Street, a couple in front of your place, and one up further. Those are major expenses because the state really has huge requirements for patching the
Mhm.
surface, the asphalt. And they end up being the better part of the road on Maple Street. Certainly the patch is the best part of Maple Street at this point. But no, those are expensive. And we have an old system like most systems around, whether it's Boston or wherever. The system needs a lot of repair and is gonna be a major item, here on out.
Mhm.
So were all of the leaks found by the person who listens to the fire hydrants?
He found a few others, much lesser leaks, yes.
But the ones on Maple Street and at Amesbury?
Well, the Amesbury was the only one that we called him in for because
Okay, how did we figure out about Maple Street?
because of surface water.
Surface water,
Correct.
okay.
When it's not raining and you got water running down the street, there's a problem.
This hydrant whisperer, can you have him do preventative checks?
You really don't need preventive checks if you're not seeing.
Well, I mean, if there's something minor.
Right, it's been measured all the time, the
Yeah.
flowage, every day, all day. And if you see a leak, then we've been able to find most of them, but this one was a real struggle.
So this one we caught because the flow, like some meter dropped off,
Correct,
but we just didn't know where it was.
correct.
Cool.
And that's the scariest kind. Any questions? I hope to get our reports up on the network so that you can see those rather than have paper copy. That's one of my goals this year.
All right. Thanks, Don. Did I forget anything else?
No, you're doing
Okay.
good. You need to retrieve your gavel, however.
Yeah. I'll grab it at the end. All right, so discussion of the budget season schedule. So typically we hold this meeting to elect new members, and then historically you want to say something, Neil?
No.
Okay.
Well, I can, would you like?
You were doing like the lean in. I think
Oh.
we're gonna add something.
Historically, we don't talk about this till later, but it seemed to make sense to talk about it a little earlier.
Yeah, well, historically, we have talked about like, are we gonna meet over the summer? If so, when? So my recollection is that we typically take at least June and July and we don't meet. I don't remember if we came back in August or September last year. Anyone else?
I don't think we did in August.
You don't think we did?
Agree, Neil? You don't think we?
I don't think so.
I feel like maybe we met in either May or August.
Mhm.
We did
Because we
meet,
had a
We met in
meeting.
May.
we met in May.
Well, but I don't think you met in April.
Mhm.
I don't think you met.
We should-
Your first meeting, I think, was in May, but I could be wrong.
I thought we like met like this and we did the elections and then we said, we're gonna have a meeting and we're gonna discuss indices or the role of the committee or something like
Mhm.
that.
Yes,
And we did that in
Sure.
May,
that's my recollection.
yeah. And then we came back in September, I think.
So you want to do that again? May and September?
I think the question is, do we have a topic that we want to discuss in May?
Hmm.
Like last year, I feel like we talked about the role. That was kind of our topic. Also, maybe we talked about like. We had a specific, it was like green bags. I feel like the committee had particular interests that we like spent a little bit of time diving into. So what I would say is like. If we have topics that we think would be fruitful to talk about in May, then we should meet. Does anyone have any such specific topics?
I think I may have promised some presentation on different budgeting styles for school districts, if people remember that, like zero-based budgets, and I dug out some old information. I'm happy to put something together for folks if we want to talk about that. I don't know if it's appropriate to the town or not, but I think it's always good for people to know that we are considering different ways of making the sausage, as someone said earlier.
I was gonna make a bunch of different kinds of pie charts with my spreadsheets. I can bring those.
I know that Rich was gonna make a whole bunch of different kind of pies for that meeting.
Rich, well.
I personally think that would be helpful. I also like the idea of just touching base in May, because then we go away for a few months. It feels like nice to know kind of where we're leaving off before the summer. I do think it would be helpful to get like sort of an update on the goings on of the transfer station.
Okay.
There, Vicky, like that's just like continually a topic of
Mhm,
interest to
absolutely.
everyone. And it continued to be so at town meeting. There was a lot of discussion on it.
Hopefully it'll taper off now, but
Then the green bags went away.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there will still be like a question of how do we get revenue or increase revenue for it, right? Like. Yes,
So is that a budget committee issue?
is it a budget committee issue? Of how we get revenue for the transfer station? My thought is like this, Vicky could provide us an update on what the select board is thinking.
Yep. So you want them to start thinking about it more,
I bet they have.
not come out right.
Neil, has there been any feedback as to how the operation over there is since we've gotten rid of the green bags? I know it's been a short.
That's basically my question. Yeah,
Because I was over there today and it was, I didn't get a chance to ask them because their hopper was rather full.
I would say the operation has improved substantially since we've had full staffing. It's largely been the staffing that's been one of the issues. I do know the board's talking about access gates and things like that, so they may have an update on that. They may not by May, but certainly, hopefully by September.
It was extremely picked up and clean over there today.
Right.
That may be full staffing, but.
Full staffing makes a huge
Amazingly
difference
clean.
there. Absolutely.
Access gates where? Like
At the transfer station.
like a fence around the transfer station proper?
Like scan your barcode to get in so that people from Concord can no longer take advantage.
Okay.
But it's just a
Yeah.
discussion.
An update on that is something I'm particularly interested
We may not have much more by May, but I'm happy to bring what I've got.
So each
I don't-
citizen would get a card with a barcode on it? So-
I don't know what it would look like. If it'd be a card or it'd be a sticker on your
It's a
car.
a window sticker that would
Yeah.
open the gate.
Oh, fancy.
It doesn't feel to me like we have enough material for a May meeting, but that's just it.
I would
Okay.
be very curious about Rob's presentation, because as you know, I've been advocating at
Mhm.
least for the town of zero-based budgeting.
Well, we could do it in September. If we don't have enough topics for a May meeting, that's fine. We can,
But I suggest we do a second Wednesday in June instead of May. I mean, in June, in terms of financials for the school, we know a lot more how the year is wrapping up. In June and May, it's really not going to be. I mean, at that point, we will know a little bit more about unassigned fund balance and probably wouldn't have dialed in our final decisions because our last meeting is June 17th. But from the financial where we're at, June meeting makes a lot more sense than a May meeting.
I mean,
Not a bad idea. The kids aren't out of school yet, so that's our summer doesn't start till, what's graduation date, Rob? Just kidding.
It is June 7th, I think.
all right, so that. What do folks think about that? It would be a general update meeting. Rob could give a little presentation on different kinds of budgeting. It would probably be quick, I suppose. It would be June 11th, so kids would be out if it was second Wednesday.
Well, the seniors would be out. Right.
Correct.
Yes.
And then most likely we would be back September 10th following that.
What's the October one? Just out of curiosity, because then this list starts after that.
The October one is October 8th.
Okay, thank you.
What, sorry, what's September?
10th.
10. That works for me, if it works for everybody else.
Sure.
The next meeting is June.
June 11th.
Thank you. Just ask the question of Neil, I guess. I was surprised I didn't hear a lot of chat from my Webster customers about did they actually vote on a bond, or we just give them a bill for their 25%?
Right, they do not vote on
They
it.
do not vote.
No,
Do they know that's coming down the pike? I know
they do. Well, yes, certainly their board has been part of those discussions and part of all of that.
It hasn't trickled out of the general public yet.
So- Yeah, I don't know how they've publicized it or if how they discussed it at their meeting, but.
Has there been any more discussion, Neil, on the 10-year, 20-year bond conflict and not conflict? but options?
No, when the boards meet, they'll discuss that further.
Sure.
That final commitment doesn't have to be made for 2 years because that will be when
Yep.
the construction loan converts to a regular loan.
All right. We do have any other business to come before the committee, so if there's, I'm just gonna open it to public comment to kind of keep us in order, but not trying to shut off. We'll still have any other business. All right, public comment is open. Please state your name and address.
Yeah. Just real quick, I swear to God. I just want to, 121 Amesbury Road, Norm Gupel. Just want to say thank you, Neil Cash, for all your help with this budget committee. You're amazing, and this is your last meeting, so I just want to say thank you for all your help and assistance over the years. So thank you.
The standing ovation at town meeting was awesome.
It was beautiful. I will certainly echo that, Neil. I mean, you have been a steadfast, like, facilitator advisor, provider of sage wisdom to this committee and all of the committees in the town.
What do you
Those are
think will do
very big
the
boots to
function
fill.
that you're doing for our meeting here? You know, running the computer part of it.
Don't know
That's not part of your list.
Someone else.
how everything gets parsed out, so.
Yeah, Mrs. Chair, maybe you should send the email out for the June 11th meeting. If he's not here.
Well, we'll make sure that all happens correctly. Probably Beverly, if we'll be doing that. She's the minute taker and she is on the mailing list, so she'll be doing that.
It's a good note, though. I will connect with
I have
Julie.
one other, just a quick update, because it's
Sure.
come up here.
For public comment or,
No.
Okay.
When you get to other,
okay, cool. Do we have anyone online?
we
Cause I
do
can,
not.
okay,
Ken Trum was on, but he has left.
okay. Is there last call for public comment, Laura? Okay. All right, then. Public comment is hereby closed. Okay.
Just a quick, because it's come up on impact fees, the EDC and the planning board are putting a subcommittee together to at least put that information together to make a decision on that. It's really the planning board that makes that final decision. But I know it's been discussed here, so I just wanted to give you that update.
Thank you. Any other business to come before the committee this evening?
The Army Corps of Engineers, the Hopkinton and Everett project is doing their master plan and they're looking for public comment about any like different uses for the different parts of the Army Corps project. And they have a form that you can fill out and send into the I guess it's into the Hopkinton office over here, and they'll relay it down to Virginia Road there down in Concord, Mass. For any suggestions for different emphases that they should have for recreation and reserving land for species and whatnot, timber harvest, the whole works.
Is that for Elmbrook? Like, does that impact Elmbrook? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 10,000 acre project, so it's Elmbrook and it goes over into Ware and
Yeah.
Hill and all over the, oh no, not Hill, but no. Thank you, Dunbarton, that's what I was trying to say. But I guess the master plan hasn't been updated since 1978. So big changes.
Would that be something that would make sense to link to the town website so people are aware of it? I don't know.
They had a meeting yesterday at the Slusser Center.
Was it well attended?
I didn't go because I had to melt, but my brother-in-law went in my stead and he said that it was just like a steady flow of people in and out. There was no like meeting. It was just like conversation and then people leave with the form to fill out.
You know how long that's open for?
I think the comments have to be in 7th of May or 10th of May, something like that.
Have they put a link to it in Susan Covert's email? The best way of getting information out. Well, that's interesting. Thank you for letting us know. I will go fill it out personally.
I'd like to bring up a topic that we've talked about before. Talk about at least 2 or 3 years, is to have made the main departments, and I'd probably start with the fire department, the highway department, the police department, and develop a mission statement. So we get to the question of, well, if we're going to cut budgets, how's it going to affect those particular departments? And I think, it would get into something like, why do we need a station in Hopkinton? How does that impact the insurance rates? Why do we need a ladder truck? Why do we need an ice rescue vehicle? And do the same thing with those three, start with those 3 departments and, do that and involve it, have it ready for our next session, our next, budget series. I'd be glad to try to spearhead that. I'd be glad to meet with those department heads and just start to, have them lay out, what their main mission in their minds is and, what the significance of each piece of that is and what's the significance of if you have to cut that back. We've talked about that, a little bit, in previous meetings over the previous years. I'd just like to bring that up again. And again, I'd be glad to try to spearhead that.
Thanks, Don. I think probably the best forum for that to start the conversation is to allow Vicky to take it back to the board.
Yeah, can I clarify
Mhm.
something? So I came up in nonprofits, so mission statement to me is a very specific thing, which is an overarching statement of what you do and who your audience is or who your stakeholders are. So to me, we could probably suss out the mission statement for each of those three departments just based on generally what DPW does in any municipality. So digging down further into, for example, major expense drivers or something like that, doesn't feel like it would branch off of a mission statement. It feels like it might be more of like departmental goals and objectives or something like that, something a little bit more detailed than a mission statement.
I totally agree. I just use the word mission statement as a start. No, I think what you're saying is correct. But it gets down to the detail of, how often do we plow? How many buildings do we have that we need a ladder truck? Why do we need a ladder truck? Because that's all that comes up. Why do we need 2 ambulances? And it may justify that we have overcommitted, we're right on target, or we need to commit more. But it would give us all, we sort of have an understanding of that because we get a chance to deal with the exact budgets, and sometimes the department heads come in personally. But the general public in town really doesn't understand these kinds of things.
It strikes me that you're looking for something akin to like a policy statement, like we have for class sizes, for example.
Exactly.
And I did talk to, I think this came up like, I think Dulcie and I talked about like, I feel like I've been told this basically exists. It might be a
We
matter of,
provided you the 1-pagers last year at your request for that. So I think what would be helpful is for the budget committee to provide the information that they want from that, because clearly that didn't meet your needs if people read them all, because quite a bit of time went into that. And that was the first year. And the hope is certainly to expand on those and provide more information. So I think the role of the budget committee is to tell the select board what you want so that can be provided.
Oh, good. But I think it should be published.
They were all in the town report.
I don't think it has what you were.
I guess
But I guess we want to know exactly what you want.
It didn't have, for example, a response time target.
you're right, service level objectives.
And those could certainly, those sheets should have that type of stuff. So that would be helpful information to provide so they can provide that.
I just think the more we inform the public as to why those costs are either legitimate or they're not legitimate, the easier this whole process becomes. I've got to go back and look at what you already wrote for town report. I read them.
Each department had spent quite a bit of time on those, so that's why I just want. And it also was not a year-long process, and this year it will be a year-long process because now it's an ongoing thing. So it would be really helpful to get that information of what you want, and I think they can do a more refined job of providing those. But that looked like it included. The intent was to include a lot of that information, so the sooner they know it and can put that together. Some of it they're working on now.
So I'm reading them originally, but I've lost it. Exactly.
So I've got them here, but I just pulled up the police department one. So it has a flow chart of the department, starting with the police chief and who works for him and who's under the corporal. And then correct me if I'm wrong, but the headers seem to be consistent for each of the 1-pagers. So the first header, which would be for every department, but I'm just reading it off of police, is major services and responsibilities. And then under this particular one, the subheaders are public safety, law enforcement, and prosecution. And then the second header says departmental objectives, and the third one says service indicators. So under the police, for the service indicators, they've got
actuals for FY 23, estimated for FY 24, and projected for FY 25. And it's traffic stops, police assistance, public assistance, and officers hired. So I think Neil's right. If we review them and then identify what we feel is missing, that these are a jumping off point.
And I think we felt it was a jumping off point and there is more information that could be provided. Yes.
So let's plan to do this maybe. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Can you send, I did not grab a town report this year, I assume that's available and those summaries are available in a digital
We
format.
could send it. Yeah, they were all in your budget books too.
They were.
You all got them.
See that?
That's okay. Do we have PDF versions of these?
We do. We can send them out.
Do you mind?
See, and sometimes,
The drive. but-
sometimes no matter how much
Understand.
time you put into something, if it's not being looked at, it's, so I don't want to go have department heads spend
We hear you.
more time if nobody.
What we already gave you, yeah. So my suggestion is that in the June meeting, let's spend time, we'll throw it back up on the board. We'll make sure we all read and talk about the material that was already provided, confirm if we feel like we need anything else before we go back. Does that sound fair?
Agenda item.
As an agenda item, yeah.
I apologize for not having focused on that, which you've already published. I just didn't get that. Good.
So those were in your budget books. They were done specifically for you last year.
Those were the one-page summary.
A one-page
So
summary,
I
yeah.
think
I remember those.
you're suggesting that the information that's in the town report's a little more granular.
It's the same.
Yeah.
No, I think it's the same.
Yeah.
So we'll send them out, but I think everybody agrees that
So I-
there can be more and there can be additional stuff. So if you let,
But if we had to read them first to see what we feel is missing.
yeah,
Well, I mean, let me give you a concrete example. The question that I get asked most as a long-term resident, putting aside the transfer station, is about the police department. Who sets the level of staffing? Who sets the cruiser schedule? How is that justified compared to other towns of our size? So for myself, that's the level of information that I think that at least that I would be looking at from the department,
From that department.
from that department. I think if you want a list of questions that I get from townies about different departments, I'll be glad to forward it to you. But
Sure.
that is one of the most often questions that I get asked.
So I think him sending those out first makes the most sense because maybe some of these townie questions are answered
Right.
on these already. And then in June,
Mhm,
we should all show up with what we feel is missing
mhm.
because we will have had time to read it.
Yeah, so, yes. And agree. And I think it's important to clarify, like, what is the reason? The reason is so we know what it means. Well, in my view, the reason to ask these questions or have an understanding is so that we know what it would mean to quote unquote cut $100,000 from the police department. When we know like what service levels they're targeting, it's not, in my mind, so much to say the police department should hire Jane and not Joey, or like necessarily have 40 traffic stops and not 45 traffic stops.
The intent is not to micromanage.
Right.
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 Well, I mean, and Don, you hit on a couple of the questions that I hear about the fire. So, I mean, I imagine a lot of the people that we know have similar questions.
It does seem like the answer to the question of why do we need a ladder truck would not really be answered on this, though. You know what I
It should
mean?
be a huge dollar item.
But that as part of that discussion, that answers can certainly be provided.
Mhm.
A big topic on capital improvement.
I was going to say the CIP committee certainly discusses that.
Mhm.
Well, at least as far as the discussion at town meeting goes, I mean, the town budgets pass with almost no discussion, so
Mhm.
I'm not sure that there's as much contention out there as some people might think there is.
And I agree with that. I mean, the same on the school side, that the reality is the budgets pass pretty overwhelmingly.
But especially on the town side, I never hear anybody go up to the microphone and say, we have too many fire trucks, or we have too many police officers.
But we've heard that right here in this discussion at times.
I would just caution that as we do this, we remember the division of responsibility, because what you initially were talking about, Don, sounded a lot like what should happen at a select board meeting and not happen here. And it's a very different for the budget committee to say, we think you're too high by X amount per thousand, or we want to see 200,000. But it's not our role to say that means less police, less fire, less this. That's not the role. Understanding what that request might be, and again, I get that's a very gray line, is helpful to that, but yeah, we just need to be careful how we do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why it's like focusing on what is the like educate us on what the policies are. And then we will know what the policies are. If we have questions, we can direct them to Vicky and she can, or the select board can follow up with us. Sound fair?
Vicky, how many questions do you get at a select board meeting about your budgets and finances?
I don't know.
Yes.
No,
0 to a half. Very, very rarely.
How many questions do you guys get at the board? I'm just kidding.
it depends what's going on. And whether Lauren's there or not, because he asked a lot of good questions. But you know, yeah.
All right.
I always get nervous about, and I mean, we've had this conversation again, but I really get nervous when we identify specific things that will be cut if we cut the budget, because Neil and Mr. Flynn or Mrs. Doyle or Miss Doyle in the course of an entire year work with a scalpel and not an axe. And there are so many factors that come throughout the course of the year that are unpredictable, that I feel like we do ourselves a disservice, like the ill-fated discussion about the fourth grade teacher, where we get our heart rates up for something that may or may not happen. And maybe get some bad press over something that may or may not happen. Well, there's a particular, in my experience, there's a particular example which I want to share. I used to work at Franklin Park Zoo in Boston during the Great Recession, and our state funding was cut from $7 million to $2.5 million. And the CEO of the zoo sent a letter to the legislature basically saying, we're going to have to euthanize the animals. And, wow. And it was leaked. And it went nationwide, and it said Boston Zoo's going to kill the lions. And and we got some of our funding back, and a bunch of people got laid off, and we didn't end up euthanizing any animals. And it just felt like maybe he should have been more careful in the wording of the letter to the legislature. Maybe he should have anticipated that it was going to be leaked. But there was like this sort of scary thing that was floated that never happened. And I don't know whether or not that was leverage to get some of our funding back or not in the long run, but it made us look really bad.
The Lions weren't too happy.
I hear you. I mean, the reason why I'm trying to focus on like just making sure the committee has an understanding of what the policies are, and maybe they are already written down sufficiently. We just need to make sure we're self-educated, or maybe there's some clarifications we can do. Like the class after the fourth grade teacher, there was a class size policy put in place, and I feel like that has made conversations around this like somewhat easier going forward. And so, like, again, there's not usually debates on the town budget. Like, I don't know, I don't really hear people complaining that we have police or fire support in this town. I do think it would be helpful for us to like just spend a couple minutes making sure we're all self-educated on the policies, and then like more informed if something impacts the police budget, we are more informed as to how to talk about that. That's my goal, my 2 cents. Makes sense.
But our police and fire staffing hasn't changed in decades.
Mhm.
And we'd be happy to compare to other towns our size because we have substantially less staff than
Mhm.
almost all of them.
And
And those two
yeah,
areas.
to the point, like on just like understanding how we are relative to other towns, I think that's a number one thing people like. The reason I don't want to speak for anyone on the committee, but I think the reason like some of these questions come across is because people ask us too as like elected officials, like, well, we have 3 cruisers or they have 4 cruisers, like, so just like having an educated understanding of like would help the elected officials on this committee speak to people in the town about it. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I would always encourage you to encourage them to talk to Chief Hennessy or Chief Yale and to
Okay.
give more detailed information if that's what they want.
Great. Any other business to come before the committee?
Just want to say thank you to Ken in the Rotary for sponsoring the wheelchair charity events that we sent 2 teams to. There was the boards versus the chairman of the boards, which I think is the Rotary folks who are in business and the Rotary folks who are on select boards and budget committee boards and school boards. It was a lot of fun and quite humbling to try and shoot a basket from a wheelchair. And wheel is awesome.
Did you score any baskets?
There may have been 1 or 2, but it was.
All right. Somebody want to make a motion to?
So moved.
All right, all in favor?
I